3.5 million soldiers are approaching Moscow. The most powerful army that conquered France in 6 weeks, swept through Poland in 27 days, and in just moments, Adolf Hitler is about to take the most important city in the Soviet Union. If that happens, the war in the East is over. The Soviet Union would collapse under the weight of military defeat. Control of the vast Russian territories would secure Germany's eastern flank and provide unlimited resources for continental expansion. Hitler's vision of European domination would become reality. June 22nd, 1941, 3:15 in the morning, no warning, no declaration of war. 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border at the exact same moment. It was the largest military invasion in the history of the world, and Adolf Hitler was supremely confident about how it would end. He told his generals, and believed it completely, that the Soviet Union was, in his own words, a house of cards. Kick in the door, he said, and the whole rotten structure will collapse. His prediction: 4 to 6 weeks. Victory before autumn. And because he was so certain, because this arrogance ran so deep, Hitler made a decision that would doom millions of his own men. He forbade the German high command from preparing winter clothing. Think about what that means for a moment. He actively refused to let his army pack winter coats. His reasoning? If soldiers carried heavy winter gear, it might suggest to them that the war could last longer than expected. And that kind of thinking, Hitler said, was defeatist. So 3 million men marched east in the middle of summer wearing thin cotton uniforms. No winter gear, no cold weather lubricants for their engines, no contingency plan for what would happen if autumn arrived and Moscow still hadn't fallen. At first, it seemed like it was going to work. Soviet forces were overwhelmed. Entire armies were surrounded and destroyed within days. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were taken in the opening weeks alone. By September, the Germans had driven nearly 1,000 kilometers into Soviet territory. They had captured Kiev, as one of the most strategic cities in the USSR, and directly ahead of them, Moscow, the capital, the prize, the end of the war. Hitler's plan was working until the rain came. October 1941, and the German Blitzkrieg, lightning war, ground to a halt. Not because of anything the Soviets did, not because of artillery or aircraft or a brilliant defensive line, because of mud. The Russians had a word for it: Rasputitsa, the quagmire season. The Soviet Union had almost no paved roads. What roads existed were dirt tracks. And when the autumn rains arrived, as they always did, as they had every year for centuries, those dirt tracks turned into something you cannot walk through, cannot drive through, and absolutely cannot supply an army through. Waist-deep mud, kilometer after kilometer of it in every direction. Thousands of horses died of pure exhaustion trying to haul supply wagons through the mud. Tanks sank up to their turrets and couldn't be pulled free. The entire German supply chain, the thing keeping 3 million soldiers fed, armed, and fueled, collapsed. Food couldn't reach the front. Ammunition couldn't reach the front. Fuel couldn't reach the front. The greatest army in the world was starving in the mud, nearly 1,000 kilometers from home, staring at a city it could almost touch. But the mud, as catastrophic as it was only the warning, the opening act of something far worse. November arrived. The ground froze solid. The Germans breathed again. Finally, they could move. They pushed toward Moscow. They were almost there, and then the real winter began. Frostbite spread through the ranks faster than any bullet. Fingers went black and had to be removed. Toes, noses, ears. At one point, German military records show more soldiers being admitted to field hospitals for frostbite than for combat wounds. The cold was a more effective enemy than the entire Red Army. But it didn't just break the men, it broke the machines. German engineering was, in many ways, the finest in the world at the time. Precision machined parts, tight tolerances, everything fitted perfectly. And that precision, that same precision that made German tanks and weapons so effective, became their fatal flaw in extreme cold. When the temperature dropped to -40, the oil in tank engines froze solid. The parts that were supposed to move through it couldn't. They fused together. To start a tank engine, German crews had to crawl underneath their vehicles and light fires, actual open fires, to melt the oil enough to turn the engine over. Sometimes this took hours, and lighting a fire under your 60-ton tank in enemy territory, that is not a military tactic. That is desperation. The rifles were no better. The lubricant in the firing mechanisms turned into thick glue in the cold. A German soldier would take aim, pull the trigger, nothing. Just a click, synthetic rubber tires on supply trucks became brittle and shattered like ceramic. Firing pins on rifles snapped. Machine guns seized mid-battle. The war machine that had terrified the world was falling apart, not from enemy fire, but from temperature. Now, here is where this story takes a turn that sounds like something from a film. While the Germans were freezing 12 miles from the Kremlin, their weapons jammed, their tanks unable to start, their soldiers dying of cold faster than enemy fire, Stalin was sitting on a secret. Deep in Siberia, thousands of kilometers to the east, he had 40 fresh, elite divisions waiting, battle-hardened soldiers, well-fed, well-supplied, and they had spent their entire careers training in exactly this kind of cold. But Stalin hadn't moved them, because he was terrified of Japan. Japan, Germany's ally, had a massive army sitting in Manchuria, right on the Soviet eastern border. If Japan attacked from the east while Germany pushed from the west, the Soviet Union would be caught in a vice. It would be finished, so those Siberian divisions stayed in place, waiting, watching the horizon. Then, in October 1941, a Soviet spy operating deep inside Tokyo, inside a man named Richard Sorge, sent a coded message that would change the entire course of the war. The message was brief. Japan is not moving north toward Russia. Japan is moving south, toward the United States, toward the Pacific. Stalin's eastern flank was safe. He made the decision immediately. Move the Siberian divisions west, all 40 of them, by rail, now. On December 5th, 1941, with German soldiers frozen and exhausted, their weapons jammed, their tanks unable to start, standing 12 miles from a victory they could almost touch, the Siberian divisions arrived. They emerged from the blizzard like ghosts, quilted uniforms and felt boots, Valenki, that kept them warm at -40, white camouflage that made them invisible against the snow, skis so they could move through terrain the Germans couldn't cross on foot, and T-34 tanks with wide tracks, specifically designed so they wouldn't sink in deep snowdrifts. 1 million Soviet soldiers along a 1,000-kilometer front against an army that could barely function. The Germans had no answer. They were pushed back 60 miles, 100 miles, in some sectors 150 miles from where they had stood. And this was the moment, the first time in the entire Second World War, the first time since Hitler had unleashed his war machine on the world, the Nazi army had been defeated, beaten, forced to retreat. The myth of German invincibility, the thing that had made countries surrender without a fight, that had caused generals across Europe to simply give up, was dead, buried under several feet of Russian snow. Hitler's response was to do what he always did when reality contradicted him: blame everyone else. He fired his top generals. He took personal command of the army himself, and he told himself and the German people that next time would be different. It wasn't. 1 year later, at Stalingrad, the exact same story played out again. The same overconfidence, the same brutal winter, the same catastrophic unpreparedness. An entire German army, 300,000 men, surrounded, frozen, and eventually forced into the largest surrender in German military history. The lesson was never learned, because the lesson required admitting something Hitler could never admit, that he had been wrong. Hitler didn't lose to a better army, he lost to a season. How do you lose a war you were already winning? That's the question that haunts this entire story, because by the summer of 1941, Hitler wasn't losing. He was winning, decisively. Cities falling, armies surrendering. The map of Europe redrawn in his favor, week after week. And yet, 12 miles from Moscow, the war still not over, the winter already here. 3 million soldiers in summer uniforms, stuffing newspapers into their coats just to stay alive. The answer, when you look closely, is painfully simple. He stopped being afraid of being wrong, and the moment a man stops being afraid of being wrong, the moment certainty completely replaces caution, that's not strength. That's the beginning of the end. He just doesn't know it yet. Hitler didn't pack the winter coats because packing them meant doubt, and doubt in his mind was weakness. So he chose confidence over preparation, belief over reality. And reality didn't care. The cold didn't have an agenda. It didn't hate Germany. It didn't favor the Soviet Union. It was just winter, doing what winter always does.